Hey, it's TDA, and today I wanted to share with you my first impressions of Workers and Resources Soviet Republic. Now, this game is not entirely a city builder like, for example, City Skylines, although it does have a lot of similarities to that particular type of game. It also reminds me a lot of a game like Tropico, for example, where you kind of build your own individual empire and deal with other states while you're doing that. In this particular game, you're going to be playing as a country that is building itself up right after the Second World War. So you're basically going to be trading with both the Western Allied forces as well as the Russians on the other side. And you're actually going to have to deal with multiple currencies while doing that as well, which is an original setting, although I'm not entirely sure if it's the right time to put out a game like that. And honestly, the developers seem to have kind of realized that themselves as well if you look at the trailer. Still, I try to stay away from too much politics on this channel because we're here out to game and build factories and just have a lot of fun. And in this particular game, it's a little bit of a mixed bag if you ask me. The game has been in early access for a very long time, so it was just formally released into the 1.0 version. And if you look at the reviews on Steam, a lot of them were very positive, but most of those reviews actually came from the very long early access time. So they're basically coming from dedicated fans, which admittedly, it seems to have quite a few of. Now, if you look at the more recent reviews, it's a bit more of a mixed bag, and I can honestly understand why. This is a game that will actually let you take control of pretty much every single aspect of your city while building it. So you need to deal with the waste, with the power, with the food, with the water, with the roads. Name it, it's probably in here. And that is going to be either something that you think is amazing, because again, it's going a little bit beyond what actually most of these types of games do. At the same time, it also means this game is super complex. And it is not complex just because it has all of these systems in it. It's also not doing a very good job explaining how these systems work in the tutorial. Now, if you're the type of player that likes to figure out everything for himself and likes leaving through all the menus and seeing how things work, testing things out, then you're going to love this. But if you are looking for a game that puts more of the challenge on actually building stuff and not figuring out how you're supposed to be building stuff, then you might feel a little bit lost in this particular game. Now, I'm going to be honest, I didn't get very far into this game. I must have played it for about 3 hours, and then I pretty much just gave up. And not necessarily because I'm not into this type of game. Again, you know me, I kind of like this type of game actually. But because I was more struggling against the UI, which also has like the feel of a 90s game almost. It's a pretty dated type of UI to begin with. And the lack of tutorial, well, there was a tutorial but it didn't actually explain quite a lot, was also just really frustrating. For example, I was trying to build a road network and I could just not get it to work. Things were not clicking as intuitively as you would expect that in this type of game nowadays. And speaking about games nowadays, I am not someone who necessarily needs the most fancy graphics, but this particular game did feel a little bit outdated in terms of how it looks. At the same time, I can almost imagine that this is intentional because, well, it kind of has that dirty, grimy look of how an Eastern European country would kind of look in those days. That said, if I compare it to other games in this type of genre, especially those that are actually made by indie developers, because this is an indie game, so you do need to give it a little bit of slack when it comes to that, still, it's just not my cup of tea. Just to give you a couple of examples, very early in the game you build a grocery store, which is just basically going to supply your people with food. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? Well, it kind of is and it kind of isn't, because you actually need to order the food for the grocery store yourself as well. Now that is one of those details where I'm like, okay, I kind of get it, but at the same time I kind of don't. Why doesn't the game just do this for me? I know I need a place to provide food to my people, but I don't want to be ordering that food in manually. You can actually dedicate the amount of food you want to buy, the type of food you want to buy. So if you are interested in really micromanaging this type of stuff, then you can. I'm just not entirely sure why I would want to. Maybe this game just isn't for me, but it's worth mentioning this because this is the amount of detail that things will go in. Another example is that you can actually start to grow your own food by plowing some fields, and you have some tractors running around to do exactly that. But at the same time, there's also people just manually sowing your fields as well. So they run over to the fields and start sowing them. Again, the game doesn't really explain that this is going to happen, so initially I was just staring at my fields, kind of trying to wonder why nothing was happening, until I realized that I placed my tractor locations in a kind of an awkward spot, and they were driving all the way around to get to the fields. Now, of course, these are things you could easily solve, but it would be a lot more beneficial if the game actually advised you to kind of keep things central located to each other, because a lot of my people were actually also going on foot to those same fields and basically running up and down half my city to do so. Another example comes a little bit later in the game, and that's something you actually see throughout this trailer footage a lot as well, is that you can actually set up some train systems as well to deliver goods around your cities. Now, that's actually a really interesting concept and I really like that, but in this particular game you will actually have to set the signing signals on your train stations as well. So you need to make sure that all these trains run perfectly in order and don't collide and stuff like that, otherwise things might grind to a halt. And again, this is a thing that I actually kind of enjoy. I recently played a game on this channel that was all about arranging signals for your trains, but I'm not entirely sure I want that in my city builder on top of everything else. All of this isn't helped by the fact that the game simply looks outdated due to its graphics, which isn't helped by the somewhat clunky UI that feels like I got transported back in time by a few decades. Now, honestly, I'm finding it a little bit hard to be so critical on a game that was worked on for so many years by an indie developer. It is obviously a project worked on with passion, and we've gotten quite a few very good games in the past couple of years from developers exactly like this. However, many of you told me you do actually want to hear from me if I try a game and I don't like it, so here you are. I do want to stress that this game does have pretty solid reviews on Steam, and if you're the type of player who really likes digging into extremely complex systems, I think you might actually agree with those reviews as well. So don't just take my word for it, but of course look at what you prefer in your games and base your opinion on that. However, if you're looking for a city builder that is a little bit more streamlined and aligned with what other games do these days, I think you simply have better options out there. Either way, I hope you found this first impressions video useful, and if you did, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. If you're still here, you're awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.